Happy New Year, everybody, and good riddance 2020. Hey everyone, this is Rabbitearsblog, and welcome to my top 10 list. So today's top 10 list I'll be doing today is my top 10 movies of 2020. And before I get into this, here are a few words from the channel. Alright everybody, it's time to get on the social media train. Want to chat with me in 100 words or less? Then check out my Twitter account. Want to talk about movies, TV shows, and video games within the group? Then check out my Facebook account. Want to check out some of my ultra cool fan art? Then check out my DeviantArt page. Want to get the lowdown on everything that's happening on this channel? Then check all of the above. And now, we return to our regularly scheduled program. So let's just say that 2020 was a really hard year for a lot of people, so I'm kind of glad that it's over. But at the same time, I'm glad that we're able to enter a new year, because what I get to do is I get to talk about some of the movies I saw in 2020 that I really enjoyed. I'm actually excited to do this list because this is like the first time I ever did a list like this. In the past, I often have trouble trying to go to movie theaters and try to review a movie because I'm not able to go to movie theaters every weekend. And that was something that disappointed me because I like to review the newer movies that are coming out, and I like to do lists like this where I talk about my top 10 movies of that year. But this year actually marks the first year I'm able to do a top 10 movie list for that particular year, in this case 2020. So let's talk about my top 10 movies of 2020. But before I go into this, here are a few disclaimers. First, this list is based off of my personal opinions. So there might be some movies on this list that you guys might not agree with. There's especially one movie on this list that you guys are probably going to be wondering, why did you put this movie on the list? But I'll explain to you guys later on why this particular movie is on the list. Second, I haven't watched all the movies in 2020, so there might be a couple movies missing from this list. So if you guys are wondering why this particular movie is not on this list, it's probably because I haven't seen that movie in 2020. If I have seen all the movies in 2020, this list would have looked a lot different. But now let's get on to this list. So Jingle Jangle was a Netflix musical, and it basically had this man who was a famous toy maker, but one day his assistant ends up stealing his toy plans, and it ended up making the toy maker miserable until his granddaughter comes in and tries to cheer him up. And I really enjoyed this movie because it's a really good musical. Like, all the music in this film were very well done, and I think the characters did a fantastic job with their roles. Like, I really like the character development in this movie. Like, you have the toy maker who started off the movie being miserable because his plans were stolen, but then you have his granddaughter try to teach him about believing in himself again, and I really like that message for this film. And I also love the world of this film. Like, it's done in ancient times, like in times that you see in Disney's Pinocchio, and yet the songs are more modern day. Like, there's a more hip-hop tone to the songs, and I think that brings a lot of originality to this movie. And you should definitely check out Jingle Jangle if you love Christmas musicals in general. So The Babysitter Killer Queen was the long-awaited sequel to The Babysitter, and it basically follows the adventures of Cole after the events of The Babysitter, and we see him go out to a party along with his new girlfriend Melody, and things seem to be okay until it turns out that there's a sacrifice that happens, just like what happened in the first Babysitter movie, and then we have some characters that return from the first Babysitter movie to menace Cole again. I really enjoyed this movie because not only do we get to see more adventures from Cole and how he's dealing with the fallout of the first Babysitter movie, but then we get to see the backstories of Bee's friends from the first movie. Like, we get to see why they decided to follow Bee with the cult in the first movie, and I love the fact that this movie is able to explore the characters a little more, especially with Cole and Bee's friends herself. And this film is just as crazy as the first movie, so I really like the fact that this sequel managed to ramp up the craziness from the first movie, and this is one movie I definitely recommend checking out if you're a huge fan of the Babysitter movie. Nola Holmes was a real surprise for me. Like, I didn't expect to like this movie because usually I'm not that well familiar with Sherlock Holmes as a character. Even though I've seen a lot of TV shows that feature Sherlock Holmes, I was never that familiar with his character because I never read any of the books that was based off of Sherlock Holmes. And so I wasn't really sure if Sherlock Holmes actually has a little sister named Nola. And I went into this movie not knowing anything about Sherlock Holmes as a character, but despite all of that, Enola Holmes herself was such an endearing and engaging character. I love the fact that she's willing to go on all these adventures to find her mother, and I love her personality. Like, she has such a spunky and fun-loving personality, and I think Millie Bobby Brown did a fantastic job at portraying the character, and I just had a lot of fun with this movie. So I definitely recommend you check out Nola Holmes if you're a huge Sherlock Holmes fan. Sonic the Hedgehog was another movie that I was really surprised with. Like, I'm a huge fan of the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, and when I first heard about this movie coming out, I will admit that I was a little skeptical about this movie, not just because of the very first design, which was very ugly and disturbing to look at, but also because of the plot of the movie. Like, even after I saw the second trailer of this movie, I was still a little iffy about the plot itself because it seemed like it was a bit too similar to Sonic X in terms of you have a human character who's interacting with Sonic, and I was afraid that whatever human character they have in this film was going to override Sonic. But no, this film didn't do that. Sonic still remains to be the main character of this film, and Tom was a really good supporting character in this film. And I really love the direction they took with Sonic in this movie. Like, Sonic has much more emotions in this film. Like, we get to see how he feels when he's being alone on Earth and how it affected him emotionally. And I just love seeing that emotional range from Sonic's character. And I also love his relationship with Tom. Like, they have a very good buddy relationship with each other. And I love the fact that Sonic wants to be good friends with Tom because of his loneliness, but he also sees how good Tom is as a character. And I like the fact that Tom is able to warm up to Sonic. So I really like that dynamic between Sonic and Tom themselves. And I was even more surprised by Jim Carrey's portrayal of Dr. Robotnik in this film. Like, despite the fact that I've watched a lot of Jim Carrey films in the past, I wasn't sure if Jim Carrey was going to be a good Robotnik. But nope. He ended up being a fantastic Robotnik. He actually made Robotnik both menacing and funny at the same time, and I just love his portrayal of Robotnik throughout this film, and I hope that he shows up as Robotnik in future films. If there was an issue that I had with this film, it was that the plot was a bit generic. Like, I've seen a lot of road trip movies throughout family films, and this film was no different, but despite that, I had a real fun time with this film, and I love this portrayal of Sonic, and I hope we get to see more of this portrayal of Sonic in future films, and I'm really excited for the sequel, especially since they're introducing two of my favorite characters from the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. So I hope that the sequel is just as emotional and yet fun-loving as the first movie was. So Bad Hair was this horror movie that came on Hulu, and the main character is dealing with an identity crisis where the workforce that she's in is obsessed with people's looks. And since the boss didn't like the way the main character's hair looked, the main character ends up getting a new weave for her hair. And at first everything was fine where everybody starts noticing her because of her new hairdo, but then it turns out that her hair is actually alive and starts eating people. And I really love that concept to this movie because it's something I'd never seen done before. Like, I've seen a lot of horror movies where you have inanimate objects come to life and try to kill people. But then in the case of this movie, you have the main character's hair coming to life and starting killing people. And I thought that was really interesting. And I also like the fact that this film is making a statement about how society views people and how people's appearances are used as a way to get people up in the world. So I like that statement that the film made in regards to that. So if you like a nice horror movie that has a very unusual premise, I definitely recommend checking out Bad Hair. So Wonder Woman 1984, the film that was the most controversial movie of 2020. And you guys are probably wondering to yourselves, Rabbitearsblog, why did you add this movie to your list? Isn't it the worst movie of 2020? Well, I have to disagree with a lot of people on that one. This movie was one of the movies I thought that was actually a great movie. Sure, it has its flaws, like the plot of the movie is a bit confusing, especially in regards to the villain's motives in this film, and then the pacing is very slow, and then there were some decisions made in the film that I didn't agree with, like there was this whole thing about Steve Trevor taking over another person's body, that I'm like, why did you make a decision like that? But despite all that, I really enjoy this movie because it has a very uplifting tone. Like, it's telling people, you know, you should see the truth in everything and you should accept the truth about yourself and about the world itself. So I like that message of the film. I also really love Diana and Steve Trevor's interactions with each other like I did with the first movie. It's very heartwarming and we get to see them discuss a lot of the serious matters and try to talk things over with each other. So I love the relationship between Steve, Trevor, and Diana. I also really like the fight sequences, especially with Diana fighting off all these military trucks and stuff like that. It was really amazing to see, and I think that the special effects complement that very well. Was this movie as good as the first movie? No, not really, but at least it tried to be good. Like, at least they were trying to make this movie good. Like, you could see that there was some kind of attempt to make a good story. It's just, it was kind of executed poorly. But despite all that, I really enjoyed Wonder Woman 1984. And I think you might enjoy this movie if you look past the flaws of this movie. So Birds of Prey was one of the first movies I really wanted to watch in 2020 in theaters, but I wasn't able to. But thankfully I was able to watch this movie on DVD by the end of the year to make it on this list. And I really enjoyed this movie because I think Margot Robbie did a fantastic job with Harley Quinn. For many years I've been hearing a lot of people say that Margot Robbie does a fantastic Harley Quinn, and I was wondering to myself, is that really the truth? And when I finally watched Birds of Prey, I think, yeah, Margot Robbie did a fantastic job with Harley Quinn as a character. And I like the fact that this film managed to balance between the humor and the drama. We get to see Harley Quinn as like the humorous part of the movie, and we get to see the drama that happens with this movie, like how Black Mass is going after Cassandra King to get this diamond, and this movie has a sense of urgency to try to rescue her before Black Mass gets his hands on her. So I really like the balance of drama and humor in this movie. And I also like the introduction of the Birds of Prey themselves, even though my biggest issue with this movie is that we don't see Harley Quinn get enough interactions with the Birds of Prey themselves. I'd still like the Birds of Prey as characters, and I'd like to see more from them in future movies if they decide to make another Birds of Prey movie. Now, Palm Springs was a movie that came on Hulu, and it was one of the most surprising movies of the year for me. Like, it's one of those movies that also follows the formula where the movie starts off very normally, but then midway through there's a big twist that happens and it changes the genre and the tone of the movie completely. And that's what happened with Palm Springs, as it started off like a regular romantic comedy, but then midway through there's a time travel aspect to it that suddenly shows up. And that's what threw me off from this movie in a very good way. And that's what I love so much about this movie, is that it started off normally, but then there's that twist that was pulled off very well. And I love the characters themselves. Like, I think all the actors and actresses did a fantastic job of portraying these characters. They're all such fun-loving characters. And I also like how the movie tries to get into depth about the main character's situation, about wanting to stay in time traveling mode because he doesn't want to deal with the realities of the world. And I thought that was really deep for this movie. So I really enjoyed Palm Springs for just being a very creative film that's worth your time watching if you love watching romantic comedies and time travel movies in general. So Project Power was another movie that pleasantly surprised me. It stars Jamie Foxx, and you have all of these characters who possess superpowers because of a pill that they took, and we get to see the morality of these characters and why they use the pills. Like, you have this one character who's a cop, and he uses the pills to try to help him take down the criminals, and then you have the girl who's selling the pills to the public, and we get to see how these pills are being used by each different character. And I love the fact that the film is able to deal with the morality of these characters, as well as introducing an interesting concept about how characters get superpowers through these pills. And I like seeing how these pills actually cause a lot of issues with the main characters, but yet bring them together at the same time. So I definitely recommend Project Power if you like to watch a superhero movie that's very unique in its premise. So before we get into my number one pick, here are a few honorable mentions. Now, I normally don't do a lot of honorable mentions in my videos, but in this case, I wanted to give a shout out to some of the movies I watched in 2020, and even though they didn't make my list, I still recommend you check out these movies. So here are some honorable mentions. So the first movie I wanted to mention was Meg. So this movie is about a screenwriter of Citizen Kane, and we get to see his life as well as seeing him spiral into alcoholism while trying to write the script of Citizen Kane. And even though the pacing of this movie was very slow, I did love the visual style of this movie. Like, the film is done entirely in black and white, and I love the fact that we actually have a black and white film for once. And I also like seeing what Hollywood looked like in the 1930s, and I think that this film did a fantastic job of showing us what Hollywood looked like in the 1930s. And I also really love the characters featured in this movie, so I definitely recommend Mank if you're a huge fan of Citizen Kane or if you want to watch a movie that takes place in 1930s Hollywood. Another movie I want to recommend is Run. So this was a thriller movie that came on Hulu, and it's about this mother who's taking care of her daughter who's ill, and it turns out that there's actually some sinister motives going on throughout this film regarding about why the daughter is actually staying at home and what was really going on with the mother. So this is one of those films that reminded me so much of both Carrie and Misery. It reminded me a lot of Carrie because you also have that same kind of abusive relationship between the mother and the daughter. But it also reminds me of Misery, as you have this crazy character trying to keep watch of this ill character, and you have the ill character trying to break out of the house to get away from the crazy caretaker. So I like those aspects of this film. So if you enjoy both Carrie and Misery, I definitely recommend you check out Run. And then the last movie I wanted to mention is Extraction, starring Chris Hemsworth. It's mostly a film about a mercenary who's trying to save a drug lord's son, and it stars Chris Hemsworth in a more serious role. And I really enjoy this movie because, once again, it's about Chris Hemsworth in a more serious role, and it's a very good action film. Like, all the action sequences are very well done, and it seems to have like a video game style, like we look at events from first person sometimes. But I really love the action sequences. The only thing with this film that I don't really like is the fact that we don't get a lot of development from the characters. Like, we don't know much about the backstories, and I wish that this film actually provided us the backstories of these characters. But overall, I definitely recommend you check out Extraction if you're a huge fan of Chris Hemsworth, or if you're a huge fan of action movies in general. So my number one pick is The Trial of the Chicago 7. And I didn't expect this movie to be my favorite of the year because I normally don't watch a lot of movies that deal with courtroom dramas. And The Trial of the Chicago 7 was a courtroom drama, but it was a courtroom drama that was done in such an interesting and fantastic way. I love the fact that we get to focus on the Chicago 7 themselves, and we get to see how they're upset at how things pan out after the Vietnam War, and how they're trying to stand up against the judge who's pretty much trying to tear them down. And then we also have a little side story about a black character who's trying to make his case, but no lawyer would come and represent him. And we see that he gets mistreated alongside the Chicago 7 as well. So that was a very interesting side story to see. But what I really like about this movie is that it explores a part of history that we don't know about, or at least I don't know about. Like, I was never taught about the history of the Chicago 7 in school. And the fact that we have a film that actually tackles a part of history that's not really taught about was really exciting to me. And I like how this film was able to tackle that part of history that we don't know about, and was able to present it in such an interesting and exciting way. And I really like all the performances from all the actors. I think they did a fantastic job with the characters they were given, and they made the movie even more interesting to watch. And I actually sympathize with most of the characters throughout this film, especially with learning about the motives throughout the whole film. So if you like courtroom drama, or you want to watch a movie that has a very unique take on storytelling, I highly recommend you check out The Trial of the Chicago 7. So that's my top 10 movies of 2020, and tell me in the comments down below, what were some of your top 10 movies of 2020? And were there some movies that were not on this list that you guys think I should check out? Please let me know in the comments down below. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is Rabbitearsblog, and I'll see you guys later. Hey guys, like this video? Then please feel free to hit that like button. And also, hit that subscribe button for more content about video games, movies, and TV shows from this channel. And now, let's roll the credits, please.